The smallest act of kindness can become the turning point of a lifetime. Emily Carter counted the few dollars left in her wallet before stepping out of the small grocery store on Chicago's South Side. After paying for her mother's prescription and a loaf of bread, she had just enough money to buy a single bowl of hot chicken soup from the family-owned diner across the street. It would be her first proper meal since breakfast, and she smiled quietly to herself as the warmth from the paper container eased the chill of the late autumn evening. Life had become a careful balance of long shifts as a waitress, hospital visits with her mother, and stretching every paycheck just far enough to cover another week. There was never much left, yet Emily had long ago decided that bitterness solved nothing. She still thanked strangers who held open doors, still smiled at tired cashiers, and still believed that kindness was one thing poverty could never take away. As she walked toward the city bus stop, cold wind swept fallen leaves across the sidewalk. Office workers hurried home in expensive coats while headlights reflected against rain-soaked pavement. Emily noticed a man sitting alone on a nearby bench, dressed in a simple dark jacket that seemed oddly out of place among the polished business district surrounding them. His shoulders were slightly lowered, and although his clothes were clean, he looked exhausted in a way sleep alone could never fix. He stared quietly at the ground, seemingly unaware of the world moving around him. Emily slowed her steps. For a brief moment, she reminded herself that she had only one meal, and tomorrow's paycheck would not arrive until Friday. Then she looked at the unopened container in her hands before walking toward the bench. "Excuse me," she said gently. The man looked up with visible surprise. His eyes carried a calm intelligence mixed with deep fatigue. "Are you all right?" Emily asked. He smiled politely. "I will be." She hesitated for only a second before extending the warm container toward him. "You look like you need this more than I do." The stranger stared at the soup without immediately reaching for it. "I cannot take your dinner." Emily smiled softly. "Then think of it as someone sharing instead of giving." He looked at her with quiet disbelief. "You do not even know me." She laughed lightly. "That has never been a requirement for kindness." After another long pause, he carefully accepted the container. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "You have no idea how much this means tonight." Emily sat beside him on the bench and tore the loaf of bread in half. She handed one piece to him while keeping the other for herself. "Now it is officially shared," she joked. The stranger laughed for the first time that evening, and the sound carried an unexpected warmth. For several peaceful minutes, they ate quietly while city traffic flowed around them. They spoke only about simple things. The weather, the changing seasons. Emily mentioned that she worked evenings at a nearby diner before visiting her mother in the hospital every morning. The man listened more than he spoke, asking thoughtful questions without ever making her feel uncomfortable. She never asked his name, and he never offered it. Somehow that felt perfectly natural. When the meal was finished, Emily stood and brushed a few crumbs from her coat. "I should catch my bus," she said. The stranger rose as well. "May I at least thank you properly?" Emily smiled. "You already did." She waved lightly before hurrying toward the arriving city bus, disappearing among the passengers as the doors quietly closed behind her. The man remained standing on the sidewalk long after the bus disappeared into the evening traffic. A sleek black sedan slowly pulled to the curb only moments later. The driver stepped out immediately. "Mr. Hayes," he said respectfully, "we have been searching everywhere for you." Benjamin Hayes, Billionaire founder and chief executive officer of Hayes Global, looked once toward the direction where the bus had vanished. He had left an exhausting board meeting hours earlier after realizing he needed a few moments away from endless negotiations and expectations. For the first time in years, someone had looked at him without recognizing his name, his wealth, or his influence. She had simply seen another human being who appeared hungry. Benjamin quietly handed the empty soup container to his driver. "Find out who she is," he said calmly. The driver looked surprised but nodded. "Yes, sir." Benjamin opened the car door before pausing one final time. "And tonight," he added softly, "send a car to make sure she arrives home safely. Do not frighten her. Do not ask for anything. Just make certain kindness receives kindness in return." Emily did not notice the black luxury sedan following the city bus from a respectful distance as she traveled across Chicago that evening. She spent the ride looking out the window, replaying the quiet conversation she had shared with the stranger on the bench. There had been something unusual about him, not because of the simple clothes he wore, but because of the sadness in his eyes. He had spoken carefully, listened more than he talked, and thanked her as though a bowl of soup had been something priceless. Emily smiled faintly to herself. She hoped he had found somewhere warm to spend the night. When the bus reached her neighborhood, she stepped onto the sidewalk carrying only the empty paper bag that had once held her bread. The driver of the black sedan watched discreetly from across the street until he saw her unlock the front door of a modest apartment building and disappear safely inside. Only then did he send a brief message to Benjamin Hayes confirming that she had arrived home. Benjamin remained in the back seat of another company vehicle while reading the update. He lowered his phone and looked through the window at the glowing skyline. Throughout his career, he had received expensive gifts from influential people hoping to gain his attention. Yet no one had ever offered him the only meal they possessed without expecting anything in return. He quietly instructed his driver to continue toward his penthouse, but his thoughts remained with the young woman who had treated a complete stranger with effortless compassion. The following morning, Benjamin arrived at Hayes' global headquarters before sunrise. Melissa Grant, his executive assistant, noticed immediately that something about his usually perfect routine had changed. Instead of opening financial reports, he stood looking out over the city with a thoughtful expression. "You asked me to find someone," Melissa said gently as she entered carrying a slim folder. Benjamin turned toward her. "Were you able to?" She nodded. "Her name is Emily Carter. She works evenings at Lakeside Family Diner and spends most mornings visiting her mother at St. and Medical Center. According to publicly available records, she has no outstanding debts beyond ordinary medical expenses, no legal issues, and no indication that she has ever asked anyone for financial assistance." Benjamin accepted the folder but did not open it immediately. "What else?" Melissa hesitated. "Everyone we spoke with described her the same way. How? Kind. Reliable. The type of person who quietly helps others even when she has very little herself." Benjamin smiled almost imperceptibly. "That sounds accurate." Meanwhile, Emily finished another overnight shift at the diner before walking several blocks to St. and Medical Center, carrying a small container of homemade oatmeal for her mother. Hospital corridors had become as familiar to her as her own apartment. She greeted receptionists by name, stopped to thank volunteers arranging flowers in the lobby, and smiled warmly at elderly patients she passed each morning. Her mother looked noticeably brighter that day despite ongoing treatment. "Did you eat dinner last night?" her mother asked gently. Emily laughed softly. Eventually, it was not entirely untrue. After sharing the soup, she had eaten the remaining bread on the bus ride home. Her mother noticed the careful answer, but chose not to press further. They spent the next hour talking about ordinary things, favorite recipes, childhood memories, and the first spring flowers that would eventually bloom outside the hospital garden. Across town, Benjamin quietly closed the folder Melissa had prepared. "Arrange something for me," he said. "Of course. I do not want gifts delivered to her apartment or money transferred to her account." Melissa nodded, waiting. "If we help her, it must preserve her dignity." She smiled with quiet understanding. "What did you have in mind?" Benjamin looked again toward the city beyond his office windows. "Find out whether the hospital where her mother is receiving treatment has an anonymous patient assistance fund." Melissa made a note immediately. "And if there is, make a donation large enough to help several families, not only one." She looked at him thoughtfully. "She may never know." Benjamin answered without hesitation. "That is exactly the point." Later that afternoon, Emily received an unexpected call from the hospital billing office. The representative explained that an anonymous charitable contribution had recently expanded the patient assistance program, reducing a significant portion of her mother's upcoming medical expenses. Emily thanked the caller repeatedly before ending the conversation in quiet disbelief. She looked through the hospital window toward the busy street below, unable to imagine who would ever do something so generous for people they had never met. Somewhere else in the city, Benjamin sat alone in his office, satisfied not because anyone would thank him, but because for the first time in many years he had discovered that the greatest return on any investment could never be measured in dollars. Sometimes it began with nothing more than one shared meal and one person choosing kindness when kindness seemed impossible. The following week settled into a familiar rhythm that Emily had learned to appreciate more than she ever expected. Every morning began before sunrise with a quick breakfast, a visit to St. and Medical Center to spend time with her mother, and then a few hours of rest before reporting to the Lakeside Family Diner for another evening shift. There was very little luxury in her routine, yet there was comfort in knowing exactly where she needed to be. Her mother continued responding well to treatment, and every encouraging update from the physicians felt like a small miracle. The anonymous assistance the hospital had received eased a burden Emily had quietly carried for months. She still did not know who had made such generosity possible, but every time she passed the hospital chapel, she paused for a brief moment of gratitude, hoping whoever had helped would somehow experience the same kindness they had shown others. One rainy Thursday evening, the diner filled quickly as office workers escaped the weather. Emily moved gracefully between tables, balancing trays with practiced ease while remembering every customer's favorite drink without writing anything down. Her coworkers often joked that she could manage the entire restaurant alone if necessary. Emily only laughed because she never considered kindness or hard work unusual. To her, they were simply the best way to move through difficult days. Shortly before closing time, the front door opened and a familiar face quietly stepped inside. Benjamin Hayes no longer wore the worn jacket from the evening they first met. Instead, he dressed simply in a dark wool coat and a plain sweater that revealed nothing about the extraordinary life waiting beyond the restaurant doors. Emily recognized him immediately and smiled with genuine warmth. "I am glad to see you again," she said as she approached his table. Benjamin returned the smile. "I hope this was where you worked." She handed him a menu. "Then you found the right place." He glanced at the menu only briefly before closing it. "May I have whatever soup you recommend?" Emily laughed softly. "Fortunately, tonight I actually have enough for both of us." Benjamin noticed the quiet humor in her voice and appreciated that she had remembered their first meeting without making it awkward. A few minutes later, she returned carrying a steaming bowl of homemade vegetable soup, fresh bread, and a cup of hot coffee. "This one is on the house," she said. Benjamin raised an eyebrow. "I thought restaurants preferred customers who paid." Emily smiled. "They do, but everyone deserves one free meal once in a while." Benjamin accepted the bowl with quiet gratitude. "You have a remarkable habit of giving more than people expect." Emily shrugged gently. "Most people eventually do the same for someone else." While the restaurant gradually emptied, they talked about ordinary subjects. Emily spoke about her mother's improving health and the children she occasionally volunteered to read stories to at the hospital. Benjamin listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions rather than steering the conversation toward himself. When she asked what he did for work, he smiled slightly before answering. "Mostly meetings." Emily laughed. "That sounds mysterious." "It sounds exhausting," he admitted. She nodded knowingly. "Then perhaps you need soup more often." Their easy conversation surprised them both. Neither felt the need to impress the other. The connection grew from simple honesty rather than carefully chosen words. As closing time approached, Emily carried the final stack of clean dishes into the kitchen while Benjamin quietly settled the bill. Before leaving, he noticed a young dishwasher struggling to carry several heavy boxes toward the storage room. Without hesitation, Benjamin stepped over and helped him move everything inside. Emily happened to see the small act through the kitchen doorway. She smiled quietly to herself. Whatever his profession might be, kindness clearly came naturally to him as well. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Benjamin waited near the entrance as Emily locked the restaurant doors. "May I walk you to the bus stop?" he asked politely. She hesitated only briefly before nodding. The sidewalks glistened beneath streetlights while cool evening air carried the scent of rain. They walked side by side without rushing. Emily eventually looked toward him with curious eyes. "Can I ask you something?" Benjamin nodded. "Of course. Why did you come back?" He considered the question honestly before answering. "Because it has been a very long time since someone reminded me that kindness still exists without expecting anything in return." Emily smiled gently. "Perhaps you simply needed the right reminder." Benjamin looked toward the quiet street ahead. "Perhaps I did." As the city bus arrived, Emily stepped onto the first stair before turning back with a warm smile. "Take care of yourself." Benjamin watched the bus disappear into the evening traffic before quietly returning to the waiting car parked a short distance away. For the second time since meeting Emily, he realized that the greatest wealth he had discovered in years had nothing to do with the fortune attached to his name. It was the rare privilege of meeting someone who measured people not by what they owned, but by how they treated others when no one was watching. The quiet routine that had begun between Emily and Benjamin continued almost unnoticed, as though life itself preferred gentle changes over dramatic ones. Every few evenings, Benjamin stopped by the lakeside family diner after work, always choosing the same corner booth near the window. He never demanded special treatment, never mentioned his business, and never behaved like a man accustomed to having every request answered immediately. Emily welcomed him with the same warm smile she offered every customer, asking whether he wanted the vegetable soup or the tomato basil special before he even opened the menu. Somehow, those ordinary conversations became the calmest part of both of their weeks. One rainy afternoon, Emily received another encouraging update from the hospital. Her mother's latest test results showed steady improvement, and the physician believed her recovery was progressing better than expected. Relief settled gently across Emily's heart. As she left the consultation room, she paused beside the hospital chapel for a quiet moment of gratitude. She still had no idea who had expanded the patient assistance program, but she silently thanked the unknown donor every time she visited. Later that evening, Benjamin arrived at the diner carrying nothing more than a folded umbrella and a tired smile after another long day of meetings. Emily poured him a cup of coffee before he even sat down. "Rough day?" she asked kindly. Benjamin laughed softly. "I think the coffee already improved it." She smiled. "Then it is doing its job." While he enjoyed his meal, Emily moved from table to table with the same patient kindness that had first captured his attention. She comforted a frightened little girl who had accidentally dropped her ice cream, helped an elderly customer read the smaller print on the menu, and quietly packed leftover bread for a man who admitted he was struggling to make ends meet. None of those gestures were performed because anyone important was watching. They simply reflected the person she had always been. Benjamin found himself observing those moments more than the food in front of him. When the dinner rush finally slowed, Emily sat across from him for a brief break. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Benjamin nodded. "Of course. You always seem thoughtful whenever you come here. Are you trying to solve something?" He smiled gently. "Perhaps I am trying to understand something instead." Emily tilted her head curiously. "What is the difference?" Benjamin looked out the rain-speckled window before answering. "Problems usually disappear once they are solved. People become more meaningful the more you understand them." Emily laughed softly. "That sounds like something my mother would say." "She sounds wise." Emily nodded proudly. "She is." At that moment, the diner's owner, Mr. Daniels, hurried from the kitchen carrying several heavy boxes of canned goods that had just been delivered. Without hesitation, Benjamin stood and helped him move everything into the storage room. Mr. Daniels wiped his hands on his apron before smiling gratefully. "You certainly do not look like someone who spends much time carrying grocery deliveries." Benjamin chuckled. "Perhaps I needed the practice." Emily watched the exchange with quiet appreciation. She had met many successful people during years of working at the diner. Most expected service. Very few offered help without being asked. After closing time, heavy rain continued falling outside. Emily reached for her worn umbrella only to discover one of the metal supports had snapped. She laughed quietly at her own bad luck. Before she could step into the rain anyway, Benjamin opened his umbrella. "May I walk you to the bus stop?" he asked politely. Emily accepted with a grateful smile. They walked side by side beneath the steady rainfall while city lights reflected across the wet pavement. The silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. As they reached the bus shelter, Emily noticed an elderly woman struggling to carry several grocery bags through the rain. Without saying a word, Emily hurried over and helped her reach the covered bench before returning with damp sleeves and another cheerful smile. Benjamin looked at her with quiet admiration. "You never seem to hesitate." Emily shrugged gently. "If someone needs help and I can offer it, I usually stop thinking and simply do it." Benjamin lowered his eyes thoughtfully. "I think that may be your greatest strength." Emily smiled, slightly embarrassed by the compliment. The city bus arrived moments later. Before stepping aboard, she looked back toward him. "Thank you for walking with me." Benjamin nodded warmly. "Thank you for reminding me that generosity does not always require money." As the bus pulled away, Benjamin remained beneath the rain, watching its lights disappear into the distance. For years he had measured success by everything he had built. Now he found himself wondering whether the most valuable things in life had been quietly waiting inside the ordinary kindness of one woman who never realized how extraordinary she truly was. Several more weeks passed, and the quiet routine between Emily and Benjamin continued to grow without either of them trying to define it too quickly. The first hints of spring began replacing the cold winter air, and the sidewalks outside Lakeside Family Diner filled once again with people lingering after work instead of rushing home through snow. Benjamin still arrived 2 or 3 evenings each week, always choosing the same booth by the window. Emily no longer thought of him as the quiet stranger who had once accepted half of her only meal. He had simply become someone she genuinely looked forward to seeing. One Thursday evening, the diner became unusually busy because a nearby convention had ended earlier than expected. Every table filled within minutes, and Emily hurried between customers while balancing trays with practiced confidence. Benjamin happened to arrive just as the dinner rush reached its busiest moment. Instead of waiting to be served, he quietly rolled up the sleeves of his sweater and began helping Mr. Daniels carry heavy supply boxes from the delivery truck into the storage room. When several clean tables needed wiping before the next guests arrived, he picked up a towel without saying a word. Emily noticed him through the kitchen doorway and smiled to herself. "Your friend works harder than some employees," one of the cooks joked. Emily laughed softly. "He would probably say he is only helping." Near closing time, the final customers left, and the restaurant finally grew quiet again. Emily thanked Benjamin for staying. "You really did not have to spend your evening carrying boxes." Benjamin smiled. "It seemed like the most useful thing I could do." Before Emily could answer, the front door opened once more. A sharply dressed businessman hurried inside, clearly looking relieved after spotting Benjamin. "Mr. Hayes," he said respectfully, "the board has been trying to reach you for nearly an hour. Everyone is waiting for your decision." The room suddenly became very still. Emily looked from the visitor back toward Benjamin, confused by the way the man addressed him. Benjamin remained calm. "I told them the meeting could wait until tomorrow." The visitor lowered his voice. "The acquisition cannot move forward without your approval." Benjamin nodded politely. "Then tomorrow morning will be soon enough." The businessman apologized for interrupting before quietly leaving the restaurant. Emily stood silently for several moments. "Mr. Hayes?" she asked gently. Benjamin looked at her with a calm expression. "I suppose I should explain." Mr. Daniels emerged from the kitchen carrying a fresh pot of coffee. The moment he recognized the name, surprise crossed his face. "Hayes," he repeated. "As in Hayes Global?" Benjamin smiled with quiet embarrassment. "Yes." Emily blinked several times, trying to connect the simple man who helped carry groceries and washed empty tables with one of the most recognizable business leaders in the country. She finally sat across from him without saying anything. Benjamin spoke first. "I did not hide it to deceive you." Emily remained quiet, listening. "The evening we first met, I had walked away from an exhausting board meeting because I needed a few hours where no one expected anything from me except honesty." He looked toward the rain-speckled window. "When you shared your dinner, you did not see a billionaire. You only saw someone who looked hungry." Emily smiled faintly. "Because that was true." Benjamin nodded. "Exactly." She looked down at her hands before asking softly, "Were you the anonymous donor who helped my mother's hospital?" Benjamin hesitated briefly before answering. "The Hospital Assistance Fund received support from my foundation." Emily understood immediately. She took a slow breath, absorbing everything she had just learned. "Why did you never tell me?" Benjamin answered with complete sincerity. "Because I wanted to know whether we could become friends before you knew anything about my name or my company." Emily looked into his eyes for a long moment. Then, to Benjamin's surprise, she laughed gently. "That explains why you never seemed impressed when I complained about the coffee machine breaking." Benjamin laughed with her. "I was more concerned about whether you had eaten dinner." Emily shook her head with a warm smile. "You know what surprises me most?" "What?" "Finding out you are wealthy changes absolutely nothing about the man who helped carry dishes after closing time." Benjamin smiled quietly, grateful beyond words. In that simple moment, surrounded by empty tables and the comforting scent of fresh coffee, he realized that the greatest gift Emily had given him was never the bowl of soup on that rainy evening. It was the rare privilege of being valued for who he was rather than everything he owned. The morning after learning Benjamin's true identity, Emily expected everything to feel different. Instead, the sunrise arrived exactly as it always had, filtering softly through the curtains of her small apartment while the coffee maker hummed quietly in the kitchen. She prepared breakfast for herself and her mother before leaving for St. and Medical Center with a small bouquet of fresh daisies she had purchased from a neighborhood flower stand. Life had never changed overnight simply because someone wealthy entered it, and she had no intention of allowing money to redefine the values that had guided her for so many years. Her mother noticed immediately that something thoughtful occupied Emily's mind. "You are smiling without realizing it," she observed warmly. Emily laughed softly as she adjusted the blanket across her mother's lap. "I learned something unexpected yesterday." "Good unexpected?" Emily nodded. "Very good." Her mother waited patiently, allowing the silence to invite honesty instead of demanding it. Finally, Emily continued. "The man I met on the rainy evening. He is the owner of one of the largest companies in the country." Her mother raised her eyebrows with quiet surprise. "And how does that change the person you met?" Emily smiled. "It does not." Her mother reached for her hand. "Then perhaps that is the answer you needed." Those simple words remained with Emily throughout the day. Across the city, Benjamin sat inside the executive boardroom while senior executives discussed mergers, investment forecasts, and international expansion. Normally, he would have guided every conversation with complete concentration. Today, however, he found himself remembering Emily's response after discovering who he truly was. She had not become impressed, intimidated, or distant. She had simply continued speaking to him exactly as she always had. When the meeting finally ended, Melissa entered his office carrying several folders. "The board approved the hospital partnership," she reported. Benjamin thanked her before asking, "Do we still have funding available for the community scholarship program?" Melissa looked surprised by the sudden question. "Yes." Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. "Expand it." Quietly, she smiled knowingly. "Anonymous again?" "Anonymous again." Later that evening, Benjamin returned to the diner, uncertain whether anything between them might have changed after the previous night's revelation. Emily welcomed him with the same warm smile and placed a cup of coffee on the table before he asked. "You still remembered," he said. She laughed gently. "You always drink coffee before ordering dinner." Benjamin smiled with quiet relief. "I suppose some things do not change. The important ones usually should not," she replied. Business at the diner remained unusually calm that evening, allowing them longer conversations than usual. Emily spoke about her mother's improving health and how grateful she felt that strangers had supported families facing difficult medical bills. Benjamin listened carefully without revealing that he continued adding to the assistance fund each month. He did not want gratitude. He wanted hope to continue reaching people who needed it. As they talked, a young server accidentally dropped an entire tray of glasses near the kitchen entrance. The loud sound filled the restaurant before complete silence followed. The new employee stood frozen, clearly embarrassed and expecting criticism. Without hesitation, Emily walked over, smiled reassuringly, and began helping collect the unbroken dishes. "Everyone has a first difficult day," she said kindly. Benjamin quietly joined them, gathering the remaining pieces while Mr. Daniels reassured the nervous server that accidents happen to everyone. A few minutes later, the restaurant returned to its comfortable rhythm as though nothing unusual had occurred. When the last customer finally left, Emily stepped outside with Benjamin beneath a sky filled with early spring stars. The air felt warmer than it had in weeks. They walked slowly toward the familiar bus stop, neither of them in any hurry to end the evening. "Can I ask you something now?" Benjamin said. Emily nodded. "Of course. Why did you share your dinner with someone you believed was a complete stranger?" She smiled thoughtfully before answering. "Because I have been the stranger who needed kindness before." Benjamin remained silent, allowing her words to settle. "When my mother first became ill," Emily continued softly, "people I had never met helped us in small ways. Someone paid for groceries. Someone left flowers outside our apartment. Someone covered part of a prescription without leaving a name." She looked toward the quiet street ahead. "I promised myself that if life ever allowed me to help another person, even in a very small way, I would never hesitate." Benjamin looked at her with quiet admiration. "You kept that promise." Emily smiled. Now it seems someone else did too. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city moved quietly around them, while distant traffic faded into the evening. Benjamin realized that everything extraordinary about Emily came from ordinary decisions repeated every single day. She chose kindness because it reflected who she was, not because she expected life to reward her for it. Standing beside her beneath the soft glow of the streetlights, he understood that wealth had introduced him to thousands of remarkable people, but compassion had introduced him to the one person who reminded him what truly mattered. Spring settled gently across Chicago, bringing longer evenings and warmer sunlight that lingered outside the windows of Lakeside Family Diner. Emily's life remained modest, yet for the first time in many months it no longer felt defined by constant worry. Her mother's strength continued returning little by little, each encouraging medical appointment becoming another quiet reminder that hope often arrived slowly. Benjamin continued visiting the diner, never announcing his arrival and never expecting special treatment. He greeted the kitchen staff by name, thanked every server who refilled his coffee, and always stayed a few extra minutes after dinner to help stack chairs or wipe tables if the restaurant happened to be busy. The employees had long stopped treating him like an important customer. They simply thought of him as the polite businessman who never forgot to ask how everyone was doing. One Saturday morning, Emily volunteered at a neighborhood food pantry before beginning her evening shift. She spent several hours organizing canned goods, greeting families, and preparing meal packages for older residents who could no longer travel easily. She never mentioned those mornings to anyone because helping others had become as natural as breathing. Benjamin happened to arrive later that afternoon after delivering a donation of fresh produce through his company's charitable foundation. He entered quietly through the back entrance, expecting only to confirm the delivery before leaving again. Instead, he paused when he saw Emily laughing with a young boy while patiently showing him how to decorate a paper grocery bag with bright markers. She treated every person exactly the same, whether they came seeking assistance or arrived carrying supplies. She never looked for recognition, photographs, or praise. Benjamin stood silently for several moments, realizing that the compassion she had shown him on the rainy evening was not a rare exception. It was simply who she was every single day. Emily eventually noticed him and smiled with pleasant surprise. "I did not know you would be here." Benjamin returned the smile. "Neither did I." They spent the next hour packing food boxes together while volunteers shared simple conversations about gardening, school events, and upcoming community projects. No one seemed interested in Benjamin's business success because no one recognized him outside the context of helping. He found the experience unexpectedly peaceful. After the final delivery was loaded into a volunteer's car, Emily and Benjamin sat on the church steps overlooking a small neighborhood park. Children played basketball nearby, while families enjoyed the warm afternoon sunshine. Emily opened a small paper bag and removed 2 homemade oatmeal cookies she had baked the night before. She handed one to Benjamin without ceremony. "I promise I am not giving away my only meal this time," she joked. Benjamin laughed softly. "That is reassuring." They ate quietly for a few moments before Emily looked toward the park. "Can I tell you something honestly?" Benjamin nodded. "Always." She smiled thoughtfully. "When I discovered who you really were, I worried things might become complicated." He listened without interrupting. "Instead, you kept showing up exactly the same way." Benjamin looked down at the cookie in his hands before answering. "Money changes many things, but it should never change how we treat people." Emily nodded gently. "I think that is why everyone here liked you before they knew anything about you." Benjamin looked across the park where volunteers continued loading food into waiting vehicles. "You changed me long before you realized it." Emily turned toward him with quiet curiosity. He continued softly. "That evening on the bench, you reminded me that generosity is not measured by how much someone gives. It is measured by what giving costs them." Emily lowered her eyes for a moment, touched by the sincerity in his voice. "I only shared a bowl of soup." Benjamin smiled warmly. "You shared hope with someone who had forgotten what it felt like." A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers through the park as they sat together in comfortable silence. Neither of them hurried to fill the quiet with unnecessary words. They had discovered that the strongest connections often grew through ordinary afternoons, shared work, simple conversations, and small acts of kindness repeated without expectation. As the volunteers waved goodbye and the sun slowly drifted toward the horizon, Benjamin realized that every meaningful change in his life had begun not inside a boardroom or at a business conference, but on a simple city bench where one compassionate stranger chose kindness without asking who he was. Early summer arrived with clear skies and longer evenings, and the neighborhood surrounding Lakeside Family Diner seemed brighter than it had in years. Emily still began every morning with a visit to St. and Medical Center, although those visits had changed in the best possible way. Her mother no longer remained confined to a hospital room. Physical therapy sessions had become shorter, her strength returned little by little, and every physician who met with them spoke with cautious optimism instead of uncertainty. Emily quietly celebrated each improvement without forgetting how difficult the previous months had been. Benjamin never tried to take credit for the anonymous assistance that had eased those burdens. Instead, he continued appearing exactly as he always had, carrying books for the community center, helping unload food deliveries, and treating every ordinary afternoon as though it deserved his full attention. One Saturday, the hospital invited former patients and their families to a community appreciation picnic in the nearby botanical gardens. Emily volunteered to coordinate refreshments while her mother insisted on helping arrange flower baskets, grateful for the opportunity to contribute instead of receiving help. Benjamin arrived early with several employees from Hayes Global who had volunteered their weekend to prepare children's activity stations. None of them wore business suits. They assembled folding tables, inflated colorful balloons, and laughed alongside neighborhood volunteers without introducing job titles or achievements. Watching everyone work together reminded Benjamin that genuine leadership often looked very different from the conference rooms where he spent most weekdays. As the afternoon unfolded, children painted birdhouses, families shared homemade meals, and local musicians filled the gardens with soft acoustic music. Emily noticed Benjamin patiently helping an elderly volunteer repair a folding chair before carrying several coolers across the lawn for another family. He moved naturally from one task to the next without seeking recognition. Her mother quietly stepped beside her and smiled. He pays attention to people before they ask for help. Emily nodded. I noticed that too. Her mother looked thoughtfully across the garden. Kindness recognizes kindness. Later that afternoon, the picnic slowed into a peaceful gathering beneath tall maple trees. Emily and Benjamin walked together toward a quiet path lined with blooming flowers while her mother chatted happily with several neighbors. She looked stronger, Benjamin said gently. Emily smiled with unmistakable gratitude. She feels stronger too. Benjamin looked toward the bright summer sky. That makes me happier than you probably realize. Emily stopped walking and faced him. There is something I have wanted to tell you. He listened quietly. For a long time I believed accepting help meant losing part of my independence. She smiled softly. Now I understand that accepting kindness can also become an opportunity to pass kindness forward. Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. I spent years believing success meant becoming powerful enough to solve every problem alone. He looked toward the families gathered across the lawn. Now I think success is creating opportunities for people to help one another. Emily laughed gently. It sounds like we both learned something. At that moment, one of the event organizers approached carrying an envelope. Emily, she said warmly. The hospital board asked me to give this to you. Emily opened the envelope and discovered a handwritten letter thanking her for hundreds of volunteer hours she had quietly contributed over the years. Enclosed was an invitation to join a new community outreach program that would coordinate volunteers for families facing medical hardship. Emily looked genuinely surprised. I never expected this. The organizer smiled. Neither did the person who recommended you. Before Emily could ask who had written the recommendation, the organizer had already returned to greeting other guests. Emily looked curiously toward Benjamin. He smiled innocently. Do not look at me. She laughed. You are not nearly as mysterious as you think. Benjamin admitted nothing, but the warmth in his expression revealed enough. As the sun slowly began setting across the gardens, families packed picnic blankets while children chased bubbles floating through the evening air. Emily, Benjamin, and her mother stood together watching the peaceful scene unfold. No grand speeches interrupted the moment. No dramatic revelations changed everything at once. Instead, life quietly offered another ordinary evening filled with gratitude, shared laughter, and people choosing to care for one another without expecting anything in return. Emily realized that the greatest gift Benjamin had ever given her was not financial security or anonymous generosity. It was the quiet reminder that compassion could continue growing long after one simple act of kindness had changed two lives forever. The first cool breeze of early autumn returned almost exactly 1 year after the rainy evening when Emily had quietly shared her only meal with a stranger on a city bench. So much had changed since that ordinary act of kindness, yet the things that mattered most remained beautifully familiar. Lakeside Family Diner still welcomed neighbors with the comforting aroma of homemade soup. Saint and Medical Center still echoed, with hopeful conversations between families and physicians, and Emily still began each day believing that even the smallest gesture could brighten another person's life. The greatest difference was that she no longer carried every burden alone. Benjamin continued leading Hayes Global with the same discipline that had earned him respect throughout the business world, but everyone inside the company noticed that his definition of success had quietly changed. Meetings finished on time whenever possible. Community volunteer programs expanded across every office. Employees received additional paid days each year to support local charities, schools, hospitals, and neighborhood organizations. When reporters asked why the company had shifted so much of its attention toward community partnerships, Benjamin simply smiled and answered that every meaningful investment began with people. He never mentioned the rainy evening or the bowl of soup. Some stories were too personal to become headlines. One Saturday afternoon, the neighborhood held its annual harvest festival in the small park only a few blocks from the diner. Families gathered beneath colorful decorations while children painted pumpkins, local musicians performed on a simple wooden stage, and volunteers collected food donations for shelters preparing for winter. Emily coordinated the community kitchen with her usual quiet efficiency, greeting every guest with warmth regardless of whether they arrived carrying donations or simply hoping for a warm meal. Benjamin stood beside her wearing a simple flannel shirt instead of an expensive suit, serving soup to families without introducing himself as the event's largest financial sponsor. No one needed to know. Watching smiling children and grateful neighbors enjoy an ordinary afternoon was reward enough. Later that evening, after the last tables had been folded away and the final volunteers headed home, Emily and Benjamin remained sitting together on the same park bench where they had first met 1 year earlier. The city lights shimmered across the nearby street, while a gentle breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves through the quiet park. Emily looked toward the familiar bench with a thoughtful smile. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked softly. Benjamin nodded. "Almost every day." She laughed gently. "I still cannot believe I offered my dinner to one of the wealthiest people in the country." Benjamin smiled. "You offered dinner to someone who looked hungry. That is the only part that mattered." Emily rested her hands quietly in her lap. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had kept walking." Benjamin looked toward her with calm sincerity. "Then I would have missed the most important lesson of my life." She turned to him curiously. "Which was?" He answered without hesitation. "That generosity is never measured by abundance. It is measured by willingness." Emily felt her eyes grow warm with quiet emotion. "My mother always used to say that people remember how you make them feel long after they forget everything else." Benjamin smiled. She was right. As they prepared to leave, Benjamin reached into his jacket and carefully handed Emily a small framed photograph. It showed the community kitchen from earlier that afternoon, filled with smiling volunteers serving meals together. In the corner of the frame, beneath the photograph, a simple engraved plaque carried only one sentence: "Kindness always finds its way home." Emily traced the words gently before looking up with a grateful smile. "I will keep this forever." Benjamin nodded. "So will I." They walked home side by side beneath the quiet evening sky, neither of them needing dramatic promises or elaborate declarations to understand what had already become true. Their relationship had not been built by wealth, grand gestures, or extraordinary circumstances. It had grown through shared meals, ordinary conversations, quiet mornings, hospital visits, volunteer afternoons, and countless moments where both of them had chosen compassion over convenience. As autumn leaves drifted gently across the sidewalk behind them, Benjamin realized that the greatest gift he had ever received had never been found inside a boardroom, a contract, or a balance sheet. It had been offered inside a simple paper container of warm soup by a woman who believed every stranger deserved kindness. Emily looked toward him and smiled as though sensing the same thought. Together they continued walking toward the future, carrying with them the quiet certainty that one ordinary act of compassion had not only changed two lives, but had also inspired countless others to believe that kindness, when freely given, always has the power to return in ways no one could ever predict.